Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Unscripted and Unchained RPG review. And as you can see, this is a live stream where I am going to be talking about my experience with D&D Honor Among Thieves. So as you can see, I am going to put up a couple of banners. So this is the result of Amazon Prime early viewing, thanks to my niece who asked me to attend. So as I've posted in previous videos and such, my initial intention with this movie was actually not to see it. I was very much opposed to giving Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro the win, if you want to call it that. Of this movie getting a big boost in viewership, and certainly wasn't looking to spend my money on doing so. However, my niece, who is a young dungeon master, who just began DMing her own games, and the person who I had given all of my 5th edition books to just a couple of weeks ago. She knew my birthday was coming up. She was going to be in town this weekend. She's actually leaving in a couple days for Atlanta, Georgia. And she asked me last week, would you like to go see this movie with me? And so I, obviously could not decline. Now, as I said, my expectations for this movie, and I'll actually put that up there just to keep my myself focused here. So my expectation for this movie was really quite low, and it was actually declining with each trailer and interview that I had seen leading up to this early release. The very first trailer that I saw, with its overlay of Led Zeppelin music and just the corniness of it, I was like, it's going to be another movie very similar to what the first 3 Dungeons and Dragons movies were. Most people only might think that there was just the 2000 Dungeons and Dragons, which was really a terrible movie. But there were actually 2 others after that, which weren't as bad as the original, but from what I understand, they're tied up in lawsuits, and so you'll never actually see them, or it's very difficult to come across them. So my anticipation of this movie was that, I always expected that it would be entertaining, but certainly not good and not a very close adherence to what actually playing Dungeons and Dragons really feels like from either a DM's perspective or a player's perspective. Let me jump in and see my comments here really quick. So hello, Max, good to see you. And Chris Green, hello. It was a ton of fun. I was expecting a woke disaster, but it was pleasantly surprising, and I'm going to get to that as well, in a little bit more detail. And but I absolutely agree with you. I was really expecting it to be a disaster, and it actually proved out, to be not. And I'll go into more detail. Hello, Ducato. How's it going? So let me get to, so as I was saying, my expectations were declining. The very first interview I saw for this movie with the cast members, it was Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, Hugh Grant, and oh, shoot, sorry about that, and Sophia Lillis, and I believe it was Reggae Jean. Regé-Jean Page, and possibly, I think it was the full main cast. And most of them were kind of quiet. I mean, obviously, Chris Pine was doing a lot of the talking, and Michelle Rodriguez was talking quite a bit too, and Hugh Grant just seemed to be disconnected from it. It was almost like the impression that I got from seeing that first interview was, "Oh my God, this is where my career has gone. I'm making a Dungeons and Dragons movie." Um, Chris Pine gave me the impression that like this was a one and done. And really the only one that was, talkative and enthusiastic about it was Michelle Rodriguez. But I think that that's I think she's always like that. I mean, she's a very, very likable person. And so when she's on the screen in any of the movies, I mean, clearly she's always Michelle Rodriguez everywhere that, every movie that she's in, she's pretty much the same character over and over again, but she's likable. And so, she is a draw to a movie if you're looking for somebody who's going to be enthusiastic about what she's doing. So, so my expectations at that point was like, all right, this is going to be an entertaining movie, but not much more than that. I didn't think it was going to be deep or any kind of thing like that. Just a sheer action adventure movie. Then with each new trailer, it was like getting worse and worse. I've never seen it where, trailers, the more and more they revealed about the movie, the worse it looked and the worse it seemed like it was going to be. Then last week or the week prior to when the writers came out and they gave that, I mean, I can't even explain why they would have said, well, we always intend to emasculate the male leads, and it's not a thing that we do for a joke or something. It's just our intention to do it. And it was like, why the hell would you possibly come out a week and a half before the release of the movie and say that you intentionally make your male characters you know you know behave either, they're either the evil guys or they're incompetent and stupid, and women will always be, flawless and perfect and save the day from these moronic men. And I was like, that's a woke disaster in its making. And um and so that was my expectation coming into it, so that really does chime true with Chris's take as well. The expectation that this was going to be a woke disaster um, was certainly set, and then, maybe that was on purpose to make it like a pleasant surprise that it wasn't, so that's the other thing going in there. Um, Pirates of the Caribbean with a D&D label slapped on it. Yeah, to a certain extent, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as they maintain um, a more serious balance. Like I mean, Chris Pine was very good, and I'll talk about the acting of each as well. Um, I mean, the acting in this movie in general was actually pretty good. I mean, it was nothing, nomination worthy, but it was certainly it wasn't like bad. It wasn't like 2000 D&D movie bad kind of acting. And it wasn't super forced or anything like that. It was, pretty much it was better than expected. Let's put it that way. And so Pirates of the Caribbean, you knew with like someone like Johnny Depp, it's a of course there's going to be gags thrown in there, and and that kind of thing. And that was kind of the standard bearer or the starter of that kind of genre of action adventure movie too. So I kind of expected it. Her action moves look impossible for a woman of her height and build to perform. Yeah, again, I mean, it it wasn't as it wasn't as terrible as what you saw in the trailers. Let's put it that way. I mean, there were instances where she got like from regular guards, they manhandled her, for lack of a better term, and threw her against the wall a couple of times, and everything. That was one of the things that really started to dawn on me that this isn't going to be that woke disaster, because um all of the or virtually all of the characters had flaws, and I am going to go like down each of the characters. All of the characters had flaws. In moments, all of the characters, with the exception of one, showed some like an element of weakness, and there was never a moment where I felt, well, in order to elevate the female characters, they're tearing the men down. Uh, that to me is a deal breaker for a movie. I mean, I would have clearly said that this was like a 1 out of 5, if that's what they did, because it's it's lazy, and it's just so damn woke it deserves to lose, when that happens. But no, they didn't do that here. So that was something that I really thought was, surprising, because the writers made it seem like that's what their intent was, and maybe that was to set the expectation bar so low that when you actually see it, you turn back and you say, well, it wasn't that bad. um so best live action D&D movie so far. Yeah, so if you've seen it, which you probably have, there were some scenes in it, like some of the combat scenes, um, especially with the paladin. The paladin's fight was really well pulled off. I mean, whether it's choreographed or whatever, I'd love to see how they actually put that together. But no, the fight scenes were actually pretty impressive. They were not, and I'm excluding the magic, kind of thing. I'm just talking about the actual hand to hand or melee combat that you saw in this movie. It wasn't over the top. It really didn't strike me that way. That I was like, wow, this is really unbelievable, kind of thing. So it was. You got to remember, you're doing a D&D movie, and the characters are based on D&D characters, and D&D characters are capable of doing things beyond what normal people can do in real combat. It's so you're going to see that, like, you know if they truly statted out these characters, I would think that, you know Holga, the barbarian, which they're afraid to call her a barbarian. Um, Holga was, she'd probably have a fairly significant strength, possibly even like an 18 percentile strength. Um, although, like I said, she was thrown to the wall by a guard at least once in that combat, if not more than once. So it wasn't like um, she was better than the average, but certainly not superhuman kind of abilities. So it was balanced in that sense. Yeah. So overall, it was a good movie. It wasn't a great movie, but it was a good, and it was certainly better than than the first D&D movie. That's for sure. Um, I mean, I haven't seen Vile Darkness in ages, and the second movie, or the third movie, I can't even remember what that was called. But there, it was certainly better than those three that I can recall. It's just relatively good because we can see so much crap nowadays, and yeah, maybe that's what it is too. I would say that maybe that's why I wouldn't give this like a 4 star, because my expectations for it were lowered so far that that it just wasn't going to get to wasn't going to get to a 4 star, and out of 5, and it wasn't going to, but I was expecting it to be entertaining, so maybe it wasn't going to get less than a 2 unless it was excessively woke. So, I don't want to like. I'll put the number on it now. I was genuinely feeling like this was like a 3 and 3/4 star out of 5. All right, so or like a 78% if I wanted to use like a Rotten Tomatoes percentage on it. Um, so a decent enough movie. Would I see it in a movie theater again? No. And even that I didn't pay for it the first time. But would I watch it when it hits one of my streaming services? Yeah, sure. Probably at least one more time just to see what I missed in it and such. But for the most part, they did a pretty good job. I know I'm seeing Max put it here that they statted out the characters. They did, but it wasn't, and this I've heard numerous times. It wasn't Wizards of the Coast staff that did this. All right. They were statted out by the production staff. And that's why they didn't have character classes or character races put in there. They didn't. Some of their abilities are non-existent in the in the rule books actually, and they're going to retroactively take what you're able to do or see in this movie and then put it into the new edition. That's kind of a way to kind of cover the fact that there's because they won't admit that, oh, we actually had no intent, no connection. They just did what they did for the movie, and now we're going to modify what our objective is with the new edition and add some of that in there. So yeah, there was a mix. Let's see. I really dislike Michelle Rodriguez. She's extremely one-dimensional. Well, yeah, she always plays herself, but she's always a likable character. So I would disagree that she's unlikable. I think that she's actually fairly likable. I've seen her in a number of movies. I mean, I certainly don't watch all of the Fast and Furious movies. There's just too damn many of them. But I've seen her in other movies, and she plays Michelle Rodriguez, but she's like I said, she's a likable person, and so and it comes off on the screen that she's always a likable character. Um, but yeah, she's one dimensional. She is Michelle Rodriguez in every movie. If you like Michelle Rodriguez, you'll like her in just about every movie that she's in, and you won't get anything else, from her. Yeah, and actually, you say down at the end, she was actually likable. Yeah, she is in every movie. And in interviews, she was really the most likable in the interviews. Everybody else was either quiet or, I mean, Pine came off as smug in some cases, and at least early on interviews, Hugh Grant seemed very dismissive of the movie. Even when he was interviewed on the red carpet the other day at the Oscars or whatever it was, he didn't mention the movie once. I mean, he was talking about some other nonsense. So it's like, wow, you got a movie coming out in 2 weeks and you don't even mention it. At least that's, I didn't see beyond that. But yeah, he pretty much skipped over it, glossed over it. So let's see. So let me get to let's get back to my matter. So yeah, let's talk about each of the characters here. So yeah, Chris Pine, and he's playing a bard. You never get the impression that he's an actual bard. I mean, yeah, he plays the lute and he sings a little bit, but there's no real like bard like abilities that you see. I mean, he was never using the music to he used it to distract, but you didn't get a sense that it was any kind of a magical ability. He seemed to be somewhat agile on his feet, and he was able to do a couple things where you kind of saw, maybe there was some thief ability there, but virtually no display of what actual bards do in the game. Michelle Rodriguez, Holga was clearly meant to be a barbarian character. She does use those improvised weapons which is why they statted her with improvised weapons for the most part. She does not wield magic, which I thought was originally with the flaming blade that she has. No, that was just that it was dipped in a forge, in that moment, and that was the only time you actually saw that. Um, for the most part, I mean, like I said, she was thrown around, a bit by just regular guards, on more than one occasion. Certainly, in one occasion, I mean, literally just slammed her against the wall. So they did not make her invincible. And I'll leave it at that because I don't want to make any real spoilers here. Ray, I guess it's Regé Jean Page, the paladin. I mean, he played a paladin very well. He was the only flawless character. He didn't have as much screen time as I thought he would have. He actually did not have a huge role in this. His character was important, but it wasn't an extended time that he was in this. Justice Smith playing Simon, the wizard who is a descendant, like the great great grandchild of Elminster, and um, he's kind of a half-assed sorcerer with no confidence in his ability, and he throws the most jokes and quips in there as well, and you don't really get too much depth as to why he's so incompetent. You just see that he's an incompetent wizard until he gains, some confidence in himself. Let's put it that way. Sophia Lillis is Doric. She plays a tiefling. She describes herself as a tiefling. Her backstory is that her human parentage rejected her, but you don't really get to know why. And so she has a distrust of humans to begin with, based on that. And you don't really get anything else. Like, there's no description of what a tiefling is and then why they're rejected or why she's rejected. I mean, all she has is the horns and a tail. You don't really see any redness of skin or anything like that. Like, you don't see the demonic traits of a half demon in her. Hugh Grant as Forge. So again, well acted, not overacted, and a pretty likable in certain scenes and everything like that. And he's certainly that, like, chaotic neutral kind of a character, all for himself and that kind of thing. And so done fairly well. Daisy Head, Sophina, is the main bad guy that you kind of see play a prominent role in this movie. And although she serves another, which they only glance at, for a moment. And like I said, I don't want to spoil too much, but no real character development in her. Like, you don't really get too much about her and why she's the way that she is and what she's what her purpose is, or why she's doing what she's doing. So it's it was a little bit light on that character development part. Let me get back to comments here. Yeah, the creators actually, literally, they said they like to emasculate men, but they didn't do that in this. Like I said, usually when they emasculate men, they make them look really, really stupid or super, super evil. And, the most evil character in this movie was a female. The Usually when they truly emasculate the male characters in a movie, they make the female characters perfect in every way, and they didn't do that here either. So They might have been playing some 3D chess there and saying basically, we're going to lower the expectations and make everybody expect that this is going to be a woke piece of garbage. And then when some reviewers start seeing it, they'll come out and say, well, you know what? It wasn't as woke as possible. Now, it wasn't completely devoid of wokeness. And this is the only spoiler that I will blatantly put out there. Of course, Hollywood cannot help themselves, but they race swapped Elminster. All right. So that's the one point where I just sat there and I was like, of course they had to race swap at least one known character. So that's what they did there. That was the one reveal. For me, that was like, all right, they just can't help themselves. They have to do it at least once in virtually every movie, I guess. So why not this one? Intentionally being vague for spoilers reasons, but as far as them changing mechanics, it's a no-go for me. Yeah, you know what? And I've watched some other because other people have done videos already, and I watched Greyhawk Grognard's video, and he mentioned the same thing as far as they changed some character abilities because um, the character abilities, if you're looking at various editions of Dungeons and Dragons, are too limiting for a movie. Basically, I mean, I sat there and I wondered how many times does a druid get to use their change form ability, because she did it a lot. I mean, and even in a short span of time, I mean, it was like bang, 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 like maybe 6 changes in the span of 2 minutes. And so I was like, I mean, it was so often that I started scratching my head. It was like, wow, I mean, she can change shape at will, and and multiple times in a very short period of time. So that was the one thing that I was like, you know what, the game mechanics there might have been a little bit too much. And the when they did the talk with Dead, and you saw that in the trailer, um, doing it once was okay. That's kind of funny. I mean, it wasn't really that funny, um, but they did it like 6 times with 6 other Dead for while they were still trying to get everything right and get their information, and it just got dragged out. So that was the only time that I was like, oh God, I mean, just move on. The gag has been done. It's dead already, and just move on from there. Um, and that was the only time that I was like, all right, that was a waste of time. Grand Place, Smarmy Nice, well, yeah, he does. I mean, he does he does a fairly decent job, and he was like that in the interviews too. I mean, I mean, is he going to do a second movie of this? I seriously doubt it. I'd be kind of surprised even if Chris Pine does a second movie of this. I still get the impression that this was like a one and done for him. But anyway, we'll see. The others didn't play that much of a significant role that that I could see them coming back and doing it again, or doing more of this. They should have made a movie based on a campaign instead of making a story around aspects of D&D. Um, I don't know, if they did it around the campaign, then they would have had two things to stumble through. They would have had the campaign, um, to deal with, and the lore and the flow of the campaign, and then they would have had the game mechanics to also be picked at, over that as well. So yeah, I think that if they were using an established adventure module or campaign or whatever you want to call it, and then they and then they had to deal with at the same time dealing with game mechanics and portraying game mechanics as closely as possible. I think that that is, you know, that's asking too much. And it would really set up an impossible hurdle for them to cover. So is it the next $1 billion franchise? No. Um, it's certainly not going to topple Star Wars or Marvel or Harry Potter or even DC, as because I mean, all DC needs to do is to come out with a Superman or a Batman movie that's done well, and DC will be right back on top. So to do that, I mean, it's not even going to surpass um, Star Trek, which hasn't come out with a decent movie in ages. So no, it's not going to be, and I don't think it's going to hit $1 billion. I don't think it's going to get anywhere as close to that. I think that it will. It might hit half a billion. It might hit. So to give you an idea, so I would say that the auditorium that I was in, or the movie house that I was in, it probably had about 120 seats, and it might have been like the whole front section was empty. There was like three people in the front section. I was in the front, the second row, in the middle of the second level uh, of the auditorium, and I would say it was probably overall about 60% full. So there were, certainly, I think there was probably only about 60 people in there. Maybe it's slightly more than that. No one in front of me, except for maybe three people in front of me. And that was a good 40 seats in front of me. So none of those in that lower level was filled up. And I know, looking at the seats, reserved seats for the actual release of the movie, which is like the 30th and the 31st, none of those are filled at all. I mean, I struggled through going through all of the different time slots to find even one or two tickets already sold by that point, or reserved by that point. I know, Takata. Why? How could this be? There seems to be a D&D one shot released every 5 to 6 years or so. Well, it's been a lot longer than that since the last movie. I want to say the last movie was 2008. I mean, I could be mistaken. The last one was like 2000. There was 2000, then it was like maybe 2003 or four, and then eight or nine-ish or so. So let's see. I think Max Machina is doing well because the game mechanics lead to the theatrical immersion needed for the compelling story. Well, plus it's a cartoon, and so you can pull it off a little bit easier there as well. And it's based on a compilation of several different game systems and homebrewed to high heaven, with with critical roles. So if they have guns, they have character classes and races that don't exist in 5th edition. So because they obviously pulled from Pathfinder, at least for some of them, like Percy and his gunplay and such. So and the bear, I believe, being a companion was something also that's straight out of Pathfinder as well. Hello, Neil. How's it going? So let's see where I was going to talk a little bit about. So, let me talk a little bit about these, four things here. So, the pace was actually pretty good. It kind of had a pretty even pace throughout it. It was a good mixture of, of action and story, and some limited travel that you saw, and introducing the characters here and there, as you encountered them. The action sequences were actually very, from very good, surprisingly good, some of them. um I mean, I'd have to watch it again to really get to see where the CGI was overwhelming or not done very well or whatever. When just sitting there and watching the whole thing, for the first time, I was trying to not see too much, focus on the important things, and not look and nitpick at these little things going on. The acting, like I said, was fairly good. It was, pretty universally across the board. No one was over the top weird, or um just not convincing of their characters. And so the acting overall was pretty decent. The visuals, like I said, were, none of them were really super over the top. None of them, I didn't see too much of the CGI issues that sometimes people will bring up. The story was very cliche. I mean, and I don't want to ruin it for anybody, so I'm not going to spoil the overall story. um I mean, you know what you know from the trailers, and there's a little bit more to it than that. And but the it's very cliche. I mean, it's been done 1,000 times, so there was nothing really unique about the story. Um, without giving any kind of spoilers, but there was nothing like, wow, that was an amazing story uh, being told. No character sheets on screen. WotC released stats a week or so ago. D&D Beyond, I think. Yes, they did. And they were monster blocks. They were monster stat blocks. They were not character stat blocks. Every one of those characters has a D8 for hit die. That's because the people that made them don't know anything about the game, or very, very little about the game. And they just assume that everybody has the same hit die for character classes. And everyone is listed as a medium-sized humanoid. They did not initially. I think Michelle Rodriguez's character was a half orc barbarian. Obviously, they were going to run away from. Oh my gosh, we can't call her a half orc. We can't have anything like orcs in this game, in this movie and everything. I mean, there was one orc in this movie, but and they clearly made it, him look like an orc, and so they avoided that aspect of it. But yeah, they didn't know anything about the game when they created those stats, or those stat blocks. I'm not saying that to be straight D&D. It's just saying that when D&D players play D&D, they play the game as their characters. That's how the character in the show feel real. Yeah. But I can't rate it above a 3 out of 5. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So that's a 60%. I would say it's probably a little bit higher than that, but not much. I'm leaning towards like a 75, 77, 78, somewhere in there. Um, and much higher than my expectations for it, Mike. Yeah, maybe not having true fidelity, but like I said with Greyhawk Grognard, with his take on that, I can understand it at least. I can see why they can't have, it's a movie, so you're not going to recreate what is in the player's handbook and what is in the DMG with any kind of true fidelity because it would be slow. It would not be as cool as they wanted to make it to be. I mean, they could have done a better job with Chris Pine's character and actually showed us what a bard does. Um, because he really doesn't he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't demonstrate anything that a bard can actually do. Um, so I didn't they didn't pull that character class off very well at all. Um, Everyone else at least functioned the way that their character would generally function. Yeah, it was again, it was not a surprise. It was pretty it was generally a pretty cliche what you would expect from a D&D movie. Just slightly better acting and and that's about it. I mean, it was just slightly better than average. Generally a good popcorn movie, yes. They did not even say what race the characters were, just called them medium humanoids. Yes. Yeah. Let me get to some other comments. That's something. Let's see. Well, no, they weren't all. One was a tiefling, and she said she was a tiefling, and she had horns and she had a tail. Um, but the magic user was definitely a half elf, and then everybody else was human. Like I said, they initially I thought Holga was supposed to be a half orc, but they obviously were too frightened to actually do that. So they just made her a human barbarian. Yeah, well, humanoid just tells you hold person and charm person will work on them. Yes, that's true. They wanted to avoid race, and they might actually do that with 6E. I mean, they may just dump race altogether. We'll see what they end up doing with it. Other than one hapless dwarf, no love for my favorite race in this movie. Yeah, there was not. There was a halfling too. There was a halfling in the movie, or perhaps it was a gnome because he was wearing shoes. So one or the other, or just a very very tiny human. But no, I think he was supposed to be either a halfling or possibly a gnome. Um, and again, they would be too afraid of giving the gnome their normal features because, of course, that would be racist. So they didn't do that. But he was wearing shoes, so I don't think he was a halfling. Or at least they don't know that halflings don't wear shoes. Uh, what do you think the movie has a potential to bring new players in? Absolutely zero. No one is going to see this movie and say, "Let me go play D&D now." No, none. Absolutely zero. All right. I literally begged my daughters to come and see the movie, and they refused to. They were like, "Absolutely not. I don't want to see it." They had no interest in it whatsoever. Um, and my other niece, she didn't want to see it at all either. So yeah, but this movie is not going to bring any new players to the game. Uh, I don't even see if the movie is going to generate that much merchandise either. It's just not that kind of a movie that was like makes it where I gotta have these toys. Um, There were not a lot. There were not young kids in the movie theater. I only saw a few. Certainly not like you would expect to drive toy sales. So I don't think that this movie is going to produce a new wave of players, and I don't think it's going to produce a new wave of merchandise. Not discretionary merchandise where people are specifically going out to buy this merchandise. I mean, they might slap it on a Happy Meal, and you're getting the Happy Meal, and this toy comes with it. Um, but I don't see that anyone is going to see this movie and say, I have to have these action figures. No. They mentioned Forgotten Realms. They mentioned several locations of the Forgotten Realms. So they mention Icewind Dale. They mention, obviously, and I'm going to draw a blank, the capital city. They mention Neverwinter. They mention Baldur's Gate. They mention a couple of times. They do some name dropping here and there. Um, they name drop Mordenkainen, although he's not actually in the movie at all. But Mordenkainen is Greyhawk, not Forgotten Realms, at least in my memory. I'm not that well versed in Forgotten Realms. I was never a real big 2D player, 2E player back then. So they definitely set in Neverwinter, and they definitely mentioned some other locations. The toy line for this movie is horrendous. I have Forge and Holga, and they are pathetic. They don't stand without their legs being completely straight. You can't pose them at all. Wow, that's pretty bad. So you actually have them and they're not even that great. So that's not a good thing. Greyhawk forever. Yeah, Mordenkainen is definitely Greyhawk. I don't know if Mordenkainen ever was brought into the Forgotten Realms by any means. I know there are some that think that, well, you can go from one to the other. I mean, they have gate spells or whatever, but still, that doesn't mean that they actually know or think to use them for that purpose. It also didn't help not putting a date on this. I have no idea if the links to the current Toril or its own timeline. Yeah, and they never will because they don't really be responsible. I don't think that Wizards of the Coast. Oh, that's another thing I want to mention. All right, so I'm sitting there. I'm watching the end credits. All right, because you never know. Sometimes they'll throw something in at the very end, and this said at the very end, and everybody get ready to timestamp this or whatever. Hasbro's Dungeons and Dragons. No mention of Wizards of the Coast whatsoever. It was Hasbro's Dungeons and Dragons. Based on Hasbro's Dungeons and Dragons is exactly how it ends. It's almost as if Hasbro is saying, we're done with Wizards of the Coast, and they're phasing them out, and they're going to go forward with, Hasbro is D&D now. Wizards of the Coast time is gone for D&D. Let's see. Saw some of the cartoon D&D figures in one the other day, around $20, but I have seen reviews that the quality control is lacking. Yes. Yes, the original cartoon characters of the D&D cartoon were briefly in this movie, very, very briefly, and you don't really there's no interaction with them whatsoever. So that's that's something, not much of a spoiler. Only for brief moments are they seen. Certainly not as another individual put it out there where there was like 12 minutes or something crazy like that, where they had like prime time of like 12 minutes. No, not at all. It was less than 12 seconds. You see two glimpses of them throughout the entire thing. And none of them had no speaking parts whatsoever. So if you're anticipating seeing them, a big deal, you're not going to see it. Yes, it was. It was amazing when I saw at the very end. It was like, you know, based on Hasbro's Dungeons and Dragons, no mention of D&D, no mention of Wizards of the Coast. And that's my proof that I saw the movie. I was going to say, if anybody challenged that I didn't see the movie, then how would I know the end credit? Uh, on top of that, they didn't really commit to languages. I'm pretty sure it will just say speaks non-common. Um, are you talking about the character sheets, Mike? They did like that explains the character sheet. Holga, I always wondered because when I looked at Holga's stat block and it said she speaks Hobbit, and I was like, or Halfling. And I was like, why the hell would she speak Halfling? That's why she spoke Halfling. All right. One of her acquaintances in the movie was a Halfling, so he was definitely a Halfling, wearing shoes, but a Halfling. And that's why the character sheet says she speaks Halfling. Not that you ever heard the language there, but that's it. Thank you for putting that, because once you mentioned that it just made me make that connection, Webmite. So that's why Holga has Halfling on her. I don't want to call it a character sheet, but so Forgotten Realms is lousy with portals to every dimension imaginable, including Greyhawk. It's promiscuous as its NPCs. It's kind of silly because there's no reason you wouldn't leave Forgotten Realms for Greyhawk. They're equivalent to each other, really. It's not like you're going into a vastly different prime material plane. Yeah, I don't want to say that. You don't necessarily see that, but it yeah, it's implied. Yes. Yeah, the dungeon master could have saved them. Yes. Yeah, I was avoiding saying that. I didn't want to say that. Was the logo in the credit? I don't even remember seeing the logo in the credits. I guess it was, but they absolutely trampled all over that and take credit. Yeah. No, they did. They really didn't mention it at all. And they had, from my understanding, they had nothing to do with the movie, the movie production at all. No one at Wizards of the Coast was on hand to guide anything in it. As for languages, when the character speaks non-common, there are no subtitles. If I see this with subtitles, it just says speak Gnomish. I don't know what you're talking about, Web Mike. I don't remember them speaking in any other languages during the movie. But again, like I said, I might have missed a few things here and there. But I just don't recall anyone speaking in different languages. I guess maybe the Wizards of Thay spoke a different language in one scene or two scenes or so, but that was it. That was the only time that I recall seeing subtitles during the movie. Correct me if I missed it. That's the point. Adding languages would give the world flavor. All right, but they didn't commit. No, they didn't. Um, remind me, Mike, if the Wizards of Thay spoke a different language, because I do recall seeing subtitles at one point. I think they were the only ones that spoke a different language, in a brief moment. Um, but anyway, so let's see. Let me get back to my banners and basically, so pacing, action, acting, visuals, and story, all were okay. I really didn't have a problem with any of it going through. Like I said, my initial expectations was that it was because it wasn't it wasn't as bad as what I was expecting it to be, which is as that's why I say it's a slightly above average um, sword and sorcery movie, fantasy movie, um, but not much more than that. I certainly won't put it at a 4 out of 5 stars or anything close to that. Joe Manganiello was supposed to be spearheading this movie. Then all of a sudden, his name dropped out of it, and nothing more was said about his involvement. I know he's doing a show now, but weird. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why. I guess they didn't want to put it in um too many hands that know exactly what they're doing, maybe. Yeah, like I said, it was kind of weird, and don't forget the fact that their Hasbro is still in the process of looking for a buyer for Entertainment One, which was another really bizarre thing that they were looking to do. 4 or 5 months ago was before this movie was reset with a new opening time. They were looking to sell the clearinghouse for it, basically, or the publisher for it. So not a very good look for your anticipated movie. It doesn't scream, multi-billion-dollar blockbuster, um, new D&D, you know, CU kind of thing going on. That they're looking to sell it before it even airs. Supposedly they are. So he owned the movie rights. I remember watching a few interviews about it. So he must have sold them then. He must have sold them then. Wife isn't into fantasy or gaming, and her comment coming out of the movie was that it reminded her of Lord of the Rings, the Jackson movies. Yeah, but the Lord of the Rings Jackson movies were actually pretty decent movies. I mean, not perfect. Antifa Man. I think it's better than Antifa Man. The Michi movie. I'm swapping it out right now. Yeah. Um, yeah, so for the most part, I mean, like I said, it was better than I was expecting. And it was you know, it was it's not the kind of movie that I would see again in the movie theater. Obviously, I'm not going to pay for it. Um, you know, I'm, if it came on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, and I had nothing else to watch, I'd probably put it on and see it at least one more time just to glean a little bit more from it that I might have missed in the first time watching it. But I would not anticipate them doing another one. And even if they did, um, now that the expectation for it is set at a slightly better than average level, the chances of them, falling below that is I think higher. So I don't think a second movie would be better than this current one. All right, so the studio Joe was working with lost the rights to the D&D movie. He had a script he had and a friend wrote based on Dragonlance, I think. Well, maybe that's why it fell through too, because they were sued by Hickman and Weiss, and so that might have been a problem as well. He also Joe M. I can never pronounce his last name well. Um, he's also very close with Luke Gygax, and I guess his connection to Gygax is a little bit more than Wizards of the Coast really likes, or Hasbro really likes as well. Okay, so yeah, but someone I would like to consider a normie, non-player, or fantasy buff, but my wife's probably the most common comparison people have. Okay. Um, so it was long before. Well, remember they had to dust up twice with Hickman and Weiss. So you know, um, from what I understand, they had two um, two lawsuits with Weiss and Hickman. So there might have had there might have been a few. Um, has a real hard on for the Gygax. Yeah, they don't because they they just do not like anything that has to do with particularly with Gary Gygax. They just despise his his memory. I mean, that's why they do all that they can to all they can to discredit the legacy of Dungeons and Dragons, going back to its initial, TSR days. Is that Gary was too problematic for them, and then the game was racist and prejudicial and misogynist and phobic of this and that and the other thing. I mean, there's just no way that any rational person could say that Wizards of the Coast pushes Gary Gygax's legacy forward. So it's it's pretty insane, to be honest with you, that anyone could think that they have a good relationship or respect the Gygax family. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna actually wrap this thing up in a couple of moments. So once again, um, overall, I'd say that the movie was better than average, surprisingly so. I thought that if if you're going to see it, I would anticipate that this is going to hit streaming, before the summertime. Um, that's just my impression of it. It was certainly not a movie that I would consider seeing twice unless the second time was for free. And you know I mean, other than that, I mean, they set the bar so low that it could only be better than what that was. I already went into Rotten Tomatoes and I gave it its 3.5, out of 5 stars. Um, and put my comment in there, basically saying, at least it wasn't the woke trash that we were led to believe it was going to be. And that might have been by design that they did that, to lower the expectations so much that you'd come away from it saying, oh, that wasn't as bad as I was expecting. But for the most part, if you see the movie, you're gonna most likely be entertained. And the acting was okay, the pace was okay, the combat sequences and stuff were okay, so all of it was okay. None of it was over the top annoying. It was never really slow, so it had a decent pace throughout. And and it was cliche. I mean, you've seen it before. So there was nothing really standoutish and unique. The To shatter any expectations that this is going to bring new players to Dungeons and Dragons, absolutely not. I cannot see how this movie is going to take somebody who is a non-gamer and make them say, let me look into that Dungeons and Dragons thing. Absolutely not. This is a one and done. I've watched the movie. It was okay. It was, actually, if anybody isn't a D&D fan seeing this, I think that they're going to actually be less impressed with this than I was. All right. Or that any other person who was coming into it very skeptical. But we know Dungeons and Dragons. Anybody that's just a casual that just walked into this movie, they're gonna come out and be like, it was meh for them. There was probably more to it for us than them. And for us, it was just like, all right, it wasn't a total disaster. I don't even think it's going to produce toy sales. I think that it's not going to it's not going to be like, oh wow, I have to get these action figures. Don't see it. Just don't. The movie wasn't that good. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't that good to drive sales of anything. It's certainly not going to be a life brand maker. So hey, if you saw the movie and you enjoyed it, like I said, I knew I would be entertained. Pleasantly surprised. Wasn't terrible. Oh, excuse me. It wasn't terrible. And I would see it again for free on streaming, probably by the month of July. It'll be on some streaming service in just like 3 months or so. It'll be out there on something. I don't see this breaking 500 million worldwide. I don't. Now, I could be, if I'm proven wrong, then fine. I'm proven wrong, but I don't see this as any kind of a blockbuster. And I don't think that they're going to make enough. The exclusive seating that we had today was, like I said, at best 60%. There was no one in front of me in that front section of the theater. So that tells me that at least 40% of the theater was empty. So with that being said, listen, thank you for joining the stream. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to leave any more comments about the movie and your experience, feel free to do so. I will not remove any kind of posts, even spoilers or whatever, even though I tried to avoid them. You're welcome to share what you liked about the movie, what you didn't like about the movie, and whatever you want to say about the movie. At this point, I think a lot of people that were going to see the movie has already seen the movie. At this point, I think that when it comes out in another 2 weeks or a week and a half, by the 30th, I think that what people are going to see will have already saw it, or certainly by the 31st. I've been looking at advanced ticket sales and reserve seats, and it's been empty that weekend, that opening weekend in every single one. And I'm looking at the Regal Cinemas by me, the major sized cinema, and it was vacant, of all but maybe 5 seats sold across every one of those days, and in virtually every time slot I checked, it was just empty. So leave it at that, and you all have a great evening. Thanks for dropping in, and this thing should go live in a little bit, and you'll be able to put your comments in there after it has finished uploading. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care.